The next kind of classification is based on instrument. The first one is very basic instrument. It's called as a chain. Uh, Sometimes people use a tape. Uh, these chains or tapes or even ropes, they are used to measure linear measurements only. So you can only measure straight lines. You can't measure a curve. You can't measure angles. Now, depending upon the length of the links in the chain, so each chain consists of many links. So the chain could be made of steel or iron or brass, any metal, and it generally consists of number of links. So depending upon the length of each link, it's given the chains are given different names. There are metric chains, there are Gunter's chains. So the basic difference is that each link is generally measured in meters, then it's called a metric chain. It's measured in foot or inches, then it's called as a Gunter's chain. The next one is compass surveying. Compass has been in use for decades. Like explorers have been using different kinds of compass. um, these magnetic compass give you the direction. So in compass surveying, you can measure angles, you can look at directions. um, the simplest way is considering the true north south. The north south direction as 0 and 180 degrees, and then you start measuring the angles for different directions using this reference line. And the last one in this slide is plane table surveying. This is the simplest graphical method that is available. It's very cheap. In this plane table surveying, field observations and plotting are done simultaneously. They're done in parallel. So although it's cheaper than other instruments like theodolite, it's generally suitable only for small scale. You can't do it for larger surveys. It's generally done for residential purposes or commercial purposes, commercial building purposes. This apparatus here, this instrument, it consists of a wooden table that's mounted on a tripod, as you can see, and the tripod is adjusted using the legs. These legs are adjusted to make sure that this table is completely flat, and that flatness of the table is ensured using a level bubble. So you generally have a level bubble here, and when the bubble is in the center of the screen, then that means the table is completely flat. Okay, so just have two more instruments based on which surveying is classified. The first one is theodolite. It measures horizontal and vertical angles. So this is a theodolite. You can see a telescope here which can measure horizontal angles and vertical angles. Now this telescope can rotate vertically in the vertical plane, and it can be fixed at any position using the screws here. It's also mounted on a base plate, and the base plate rotates in the horizontal plane or the horizontal axis, and that can be fixed at any position using screws given here. Now this can't be used as such. This is generally used in addition to a staff or a prism, and this one is mounted on the top of a tripod. So when the legs of the tripod are adjusted to level this instrument, there's a bubble here which comes to the center. So again, when the bubble is at the center, that means this instrument is completely leveled. The next one is photogrammetry. So photogrammetry is an interesting type of surveying. This is again of two types. It's aerial photogrammetry or terrestrial. So photogrammetry, as the name suggests, it involves taking photos of land features which contain natural features or man-made features like buildings, bridges, etc. And using those photos, you reconstruct the image using a software. So you don't generally have only one camera taking photo of the land feature. Let's say there's a land feature here. This is one of the views from which I have taken a photo. I will take multiple photos of this mountain and the valley from different angles and feed all those images to a photogrammetry software. Uh, there are different softwares like Recap Pro, developed by Autodesk. There is Info from Trimble. There is one called Drone Deploy, one called Photo Modeler Profile. There are many photogrammetry software. So when you feed images like this from different angles to the software, they will develop a 3D model of the feature, and you'll get something like this. So this is the original image, and this is a 3D model of the land feature with different topographies like mountains, trees, etc. Okay, so that's how photogrammetry works. Um, there are much more sophisticated instruments which I'll be talking about, but before I move on to them, I would like to talk about a little bit of fundamentals that any surveyor needs to know. These fundamental concepts would lay the foundation for anybody to build their career on. Okay, this is the bare minimum that any surveyor needs to know. So the first one is control points, the very first concept that I would like to talk about. Now, any point which has a known coordinates and elevation, or whose location is known, is called as a control point. So in this figure, the point A is a point whose location is known, that's coordinates and elevation. Point B is a point whose location and elevation coordinates are known. So using these 2 points, I can find the location of a third point. Surveyors generally start working from the control points. They generally join the control points to establish the baseline, and they work from the baseline to any unknown point. As I said, using 2 control points, A and B, you can find the location of a third point. You can find its coordinates and elevation by making linear measurements or angular measurements from A or B. So that's what I have shown here. When you have 2 control points and an unknown point C, you can make distance or angular measurements from these 2 points to the point C, and these distance or angular measurements can be used along with the coordinates of A or B to find the location, elevation, and coordinates of C. So there are different techniques, again, different types of techniques that are used in geometry. When you use only distances, that's called as trilateration. Here from A, D2 is measured to C, from B, D1 to measure to C. So you just use these 2 to find the position of C. And here, the distance D1 is measured along AB, and from there, a perpendicular line with the distance D2 is measured to C. And in this one, you have an angle measured from B and a distance measured from B to C in that direction. So that gives you the point C. Here, there is no distance measurement, and this technique is called triangulation. You have only angular measurements. You make 2 angular measurements, and wherever that joins, that's going to be your C. Here, you make 1 angle and 1 distance measurement, and you are cross-checking using another distance measurement. So there are various techniques, various different methods in geometry which you can use to find out the coordinate of the point C. So once you find the point C, then you use either B and C or A and C to locate another point. So that's how the surveying actually gets done in the field. Sometimes more control points are used to find C because, as I said, these measurements are prone to human errors and sometimes even instrument errors. So generally, you repeat these processes at least 3 or 4 times to get the average of the location, and then you use that. And sometimes, if it's a bigger project of state or national level importance, then multiple control points are used to locate the same point and just to cross check if that point is completely correct and error free. Now, the next, that's the last technique I would like to talk about in these fundamentals, is working from whole to part. Now, what does it mean, working from whole to part? Working from whole to part means when I'm given a site, let's say this is my site of survey, this is what I have to survey, this is my site of land in which I'm going to construct later, I'm going to survey now. First, I start surveying using control points. So I establish control points along the boundary of the survey. So these red dots here, those are my control points, or those are my major control points, I would say, which need to be estimated or which need to be found with the maximum level of accuracy. I use a lot of money, I use a lot of sophisticated instruments to find these points because they need to be completely accurate. Okay, and once I do that, I use these control points, any of these 2 control points, to establish much smaller control points. Like, you know, these blue triangles have vertices, right? The vertex of each triangle, that's a control point. So using these 2 points, I can find the vertex of this point, I can find this one, like that. So these are called as minor control points, which are found using much less sophisticated technology, because I don't really want to spend a lot of money on the project. So I first spend good amount of money on establishing the major control points, and once that is done with good amount of accuracy, then I move on to find the minor control points with a moderate level of accuracy, and but a much cheaper method. So once this is found, I start surveying this piece of land using these control points again. I break it down into much smaller triangles, and then that process continues, so on and so forth. Now, why is it done this way? So why is working from whole to part suggested, and why not part to whole? Why don't I ask, let's say I have a 500 square kilometer area here. Why don't I ask 500 people to go and survey one square kilometer area? All I break it down into small bits and pieces. I ask different people to survey each part like this one person, that one person, this one person, and then why don't I club all of them? Because if I do that, each person may make different mistakes. So this person may have 1% error, this person may have no error, this person may have minus 1% error, this person may have like 0.5% error. So when all those errors add up, when it comes to the bigger picture, when it comes to the bigger area which is being surveyed, all those errors add up, and those errors are going to multiply many times. So instead of doing that, what I do is I first survey the boundary regions and establish the control points with maximum accuracy, and then I work inwards so that I decrease the amount of error. So that's basically working from whole to part, which almost all the surveys use in any part of the world. That's a very basic fundamental principle that's being put to use. So before I start talking about the sophisticated instruments that I was telling, I would also like to give a brief background about how technologically has surveying come through the years. How old is surveying, first of all? So if you look at the figures here, surveying has been in place for about 5,000 years. So in 3000 BC itself, Egyptians were using ropes for surveying. Now these ropes have knots at regular intervals. They could be like 0.5 feet, 1 feet, 1 meter, so that people know if I have 10 knots between me and another person standing at a distance, then I can say that it's 10 times each knot. And if each knot is 0.5 meter, then I can say 10 into half is 5 meters, like that. So that's how people measure these linear dimensions using rope. So this is basically like chain. This is a primitive instrument to chain, you can say that. In 300 AD, Romans were the first ones to recognize land surveyors as professionals. Land surveying as a engineering profession was recognized then. They used a particular instrument called chroma. They started measuring right angles using this primitive instrument. Now it's basically a vertical staff with horizontal cross pieces, you can see, which are mounted at right angles to each other on a bracket. And at the edge of each cross piece, you'll have plumb bobs, and using these plumb bobs, you can drop these plumb bobs to mark different pieces of the land. Now, one of the surveyors holds this, and the helper or the second surveyor, he'll be holding a staff or a stick or a prism, and he'll be asked to move from one point to another to find right angles in the field. Then surveying grew over the years. Then fast forwarding in the last 4 or 5 centuries, in 16th century, triangulation technique was done in Netherlands, the first triangulation technique. And over the centuries, triangulation networks of countries have been developed as well. Now, what does triangulation mean? As I said before, triangulation means you just measure angles from the control points. You don't measure any distance at all. So distance measurement is trilateration, angular measurement is triangulation. So when you have 2 control points, you find the third point C, and then using that point D, you find another point D. Like that, you keep going on using different triangles. In 18th century, the first theodolite was built. As you can see, this is a primitive theodolite. This is not a modern day theodolite. A modern day theodolite looks much more sophisticated. I'll probably show you in another photo. But this is a primitive theodolite with just a telescope, which is mounted on a rotating platform. This telescope itself can be rotated in the vertical plane, can move up or down, and this platform can be rotated in the horizontal plane, and they can be fixed at a particular position using screws. Fast forwarding to the previous century, that is 20th century, in every field electronic advancements have come. So even in surveying, electronic advancements have led to the use of EDM, that is electronic distance measurement, and global positioning system. Now EDM is generally used as a part of total station. Total station is similar to a theodolite with electronic distance measurements. So I'll be talking about that now. So now we are going to look at state of the art. So this is the current trend in surveying. Generally, surveyors use total station. So this is kind of the most common equipment that you can find among surveyors. The good thing about this equipment is that it can be used as a dumpy level, can be used to do leveling, it can be used as a theodolite, as I showed in the previous slide. You have a telescope here, this one can be rotated in the vertical plane, and this one also moves in the horizontal plane because there is a rotating platform here. And you also have screws to fix them in position. Now, obviously, this can't be used on the ground. It has to be put on the top of a tripod, which has 3 legs, and it is leveled using those legs. And it can't be used alone. It can be used with a prism, or it can be used with a staff. Generally, if you are not measuring electronic distance measurements, then you use a staff. If you are using electronic distance measurements, then you use a prism. Now you have this telescope, which can also emit light radiations. So when you use the electronic distance measurement part of this instrument, it emits, there's a button on the side which you press it, and then it emits a light ray, and that is reflected by this prism here. And once the reflected beam comes back, then this instrument measures the time for the reflected beam to come back, and using the time, it calculates the speed. Okay, so this is a very basic instrument. This is generally manufactured by companies like Topcon, Nokia, etc. The next one is real-time kinematic GPS. So GPS, as you all know, is global positioning system. Now this is not a RTK GPS instrument. This is just an electronic device. It could be a tablet or a mobile phone, any electronic device, showing that it has a GPS receiver inbuilt to it. Okay, so GPS is generally used to find coordinates of any point on the ground. Now it uses trilateration. As I said, it uses distance measurement and not triangulation. It doesn't use angular measurement. Now GPS is a satellite-based navigation system. You all know, when a receiver requests data from the satellites send the receiver a lot of data, such as the position of the satellite, the time of the transmission of the wave, and also the distance between the satellite and the receiver. Now, generally, 4 or more satellites are used to get accurate location of any GPS receiver. And in RTK GPS, which is real-time kinematic GPS, it uses a bit more sophisticated technology, because the signal waves which are emitted by the satellites, on top of those signal waves, a carrier wave is also sent, and using the carrier waves, the accuracy of the location can be found out. The location can be found out to the best possible accuracy, and you can locate yourself within centimeters of your position. Okay, so that's RTK GPS. And the next and the last instrument, or the technique rather, I would talk about is LiDAR, light detection and ranging. This is coming to the forefront these days because of the use of drones and even manned aerial vehicles is possible these days. So as I said, LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. In this technique, aircraft send laser beams to hit targets and collect the reflected beams using a collector. And these aircrafts also have GPS fitted onto them. So you can see in this photo, you have an aircraft. Now this aircraft could be a plane, it could be a jet, it could be a helicopter, or it could even be a drone. So it sends light. This is the light detection that's going on. It sends the laser beams to hit different parts of the ground, that's buildings or trees or the ground itself, and then it comes back to the receiver. And once it collects the data, that can be used to uh, develop photos of these areas or 3D reconstruction of the areas. Now, to know the position of this aircraft, it has a GPS receiver inside it, which works in conjunction with a satellite. It's actually multiple satellites and also a ground unit. So this is how light detection and ranging works. It's very easy to survey large areas, but at the same time, it's very, very costly, and private companies generally can't afford it. It's generally done by government agencies as well at the moment. Maybe in the future it's affordable to everyone, but right now it's not. Uh, so that's the state of the art today, and I'll probably finish with this case study that I have done on drone surveying or unmanned aerial vehicle surveying. Now, I can confidently say that this is by far the most sophisticated surveying technique that's available today. It's very costly to survey large areas, and only average flying platforms can be bought at an economical price. If you want to find a cheap, sturdy platform, that's not possible. All those platforms which are sturdy are going to cost you a lot. You need to be ready to shell out a lot of money. And that's not it. Even if you're ready to spell out money, you still have other complications like legal procedures. So it's not like if I buy a drone, if I'm rich and if I buy a drone, I can just fly it anywhere I want. No, I can't. It's not a kite. I can't fly anywhere I want because drones are generally very sensitive. Because if it gets in the wrong hands, they could be misused as well. So that's another problem. You need to get legal licenses, everything sorted. And there are certain areas, especially near airports, there are no-fly zones. Nobody can fly in those areas because it's for a simple reason. Because if an aircraft or airplane is going to land, you don't want people flying drones there, right? So there are restrictions depending upon the area, depending upon the size of the project, depending upon the money that you have, and also legally you have a lot of procedure to finish before you can start using drones for surveying. But the good thing is it's easy to carry. You can just put it in your suitcase and carry it anywhere you want. It's easy to maintain. It's easy to operate. It has almost zero maintenance cost. You just need to charge it and use it. That's it. And it's very easy to operate. Like I'm pretty sure most of you would have used PlayStation's joysticks and all. If you can use a joystick, it's much, much easier to use a drone. And operation wise, the other good part is it's not affected by weather. It can function very well in cloud, in rain, in sun, in any weather. And also the other good thing is it can be clubbed with other upcoming technologies like photogrammetry or lidar. Say I can just put a camera on the drone, then I can collect image. I can ask the drone to fly in different places from different angles, collect the images from different angles. I can develop a photogrammetry image using a software. Or if I want to use lidar, I just put a laser beam emitter and a collector, and also put a GPS locator on top of the drone, and then collect the information. And I can very well use lidar technique with it as well. So that's basically the limitations and advantages of drone surveying. Now this is generally used for very, very rare projects, as I said, of international importance. Sometimes for military it's used. You would have seen that for military surveys drones are used, but right now it's not available for common man. It's not even available for private firms if they don't have a legal license. So that kinds of brings us to the end of the webinar. Before I finish up, I would like to give you some suggestions about how to prepare for a career. Of course, you need to gain some relevant practical and theoretical knowledge. The best way I would say is to go through university courses, take up specialized degrees, or go through online courses and online content. In India, unfortunately, I don't think any university gives bachelor's degree for surveying. You either need to have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and you can do a master's in surveying, or if you want to study surveying, then you do it as a part of just a bachelor course in civil engineering. Of course, there are a lot of online courses and online content also, which would help you to gather more information. If you want to gain practical experience, I would say start with getting experience by working in unis in your lab sessions. You can also work on student projects yourself. Apart from the instruments, these days a lot of demand is also there for software skill set. It's not just maybe 10-20 years back only people who knew to operate instruments were in demand, but now because softwares are also being put to use in this field, if you know software, then you may be in demand as well, because it's kind of getting split into two fields. It has people who work in the field and people who work in the office. It's kind of pre-processing and post-processing as well. And you can also do research if you're interested in research. You can use any state-of-the-art technology if it's available to you. If you have access, you can use them to do research projects. You can work as a research assistant at universities. If you want to get more industry relevant experience, then it's better to do internships or student trainings in industries. And in surveying as a whole, if you want to build a career, I would suggest you to sharpen your analytical math skills. It's not hard. It's actually pretty easy, and anybody can do that. But you need to be interested in this field. So if you're interested in this field, then you can start grooming yourself slowly. And the other main thing is, if you want to climb up the ranks quicker, then you need to be always on the lookout for advanced trends in this field, or you need to always be updated about what are the current technologies that are being put to use, what companies use them, what companies don't really use them, and all that. Finally, I would give you a very typical career path. As I said, this is a very, very conventional career path. You start being an assistant surveyor. That's how people start. Once you graduate, you get hired as an assistant surveyor, or you can just finish your diploma and start as an assistant surveyor. Then you become a surveyor, of course, within 2 or 3 years, depending upon the company and its demands. And maybe half a decade later, senior surveyor, and slowly you become assistant general manager and general manager. Now, as I said, this is a very, very conventional path. Not everyone goes through this path. Some of them go through this path, but some of them also look up to different options. Like if you're good in processing images using software, then you could apply for jobs in, let's say, with Meteorological Department of India. Okay, let's say I'm going to do a weather survey, or if I want to do a mine survey, maybe you could even apply for jobs in defense organizations. So it's up to you. But in abroad, one good thing I would say is they have specialized courses for surveyors. So anybody who has done civil engineering can't just go and take up a survey job, because there will be already people who do bachelor or diploma in surveying, and they are only preferred for surveying jobs. But in India, the market is pretty wide open. There are many private companies also who are willing to hire surveyors, or who are willing to hire graduates and group them into surveyors. The best example is L&T, Larsen & Toubro. Afcons has a lot of surveying jobs. AECOM has, Hindustan Construction Company, WSP, Leighton Contractors, Monte Carlo, Mott MacDonald, MBF Infrastructures. There are many such companies which you can just approach and you can bag a job. So that brings us to the end of the webinar.